All right, so you guys have sent over some pretty wild stuff on Napoleon Hill lately and success, and we're going to dive deep on this one. This time we're looking at excerpts from Outwitting the Devil. And yeah, you heard that right. Hill claims he actually sat down with the devil to figure out why people fail. It's a crazy idea, right? But even people like T. Harv Eker and Gene Chatsky are in the foreword of this thing, saying it's like a total game changer.
Yeah, it's fascinating how Hill takes this idea of failure and turns it into like this cunning enemy, you know, this devil figure. It's a really unique way to explore those parts of ourselves that kind of sabotage our own success.
Yeah, totally. And what we're really trying to do in this deep dive is to pull out those practical things from Hill's philosophy. You know, the stuff you can actually use. So whether you're trying to start a business or break a bad habit or just wrap your head around how your mind works, we're going to help you find those light bulb moments.
Yeah, and Hill's main point is that success isn't about luck. It's about mastering certain principles. And to understand those, I think we got to look at how Hill mastered them himself.
Okay, so let's talk about Napoleon Hill, the man behind the curtain. He wasn't always like this success guru, right?
Oh, not at all. Hill actually went through a lot of struggles early in his career. Like there's this turning point he talks about when he was almost totally broke. He was just walking around a schoolhouse feeling completely lost. And he describes this sudden urge to write,
Yeah.
like a voice coming out of nowhere telling him to do it.
Whoa, hold on. So are we talking like divine intervention here?
Well, Hill believed in what he called the other self, this source of power and guidance that kind of kicks in when times are tough.
Yeah.
He said a lot of his success came from tapping into this other self, like this one time when he just randomly felt like he had to go to Philadelphia, like for a business opportunity. And somehow everything just magically worked out.
Okay, you got me hooked. But let's get to this devil. Hill says he actually interviewed the devil. But I'm guessing we're not talking about an actual sit down with Satan here.
Right. It's definitely a metaphor. Hill's using the devil to represent those negative voices we all have in our minds, the ones that hold us back.
So what does the devil have to say for himself? Why is he so interested in making people fail?
Well, the devil claims he controls like 98% of people.
Yeah.
He says he does it by taking advantage of their negative thoughts and encouraging them to just drift through life without any real purpose. He feeds off fear and insecurity, anything to keep people stuck in this cycle of mediocrity.
That whole drifting thing, that feeling of being on autopilot and not really in control of your life, that definitely hits home for me. It makes you think about all those times when you're just going through the motions, not really making conscious choices.
Exactly. And think about your own goals, your ambitions. Do you ever feel like you're drifting in some parts of your life? Your career maybe, or relationships, or even your health? Hill would say that drifting is the opposite of success.
Okay, so if the devil is the mastermind behind all this drifting, how does he actually do it? What are his tricks?
He's got a whole bunch of tricks up his sleeve, but fear is definitely his favorite weapon. He loves to play on our fears of like poverty or criticism or even getting sick. And think about all the information you take in every day. Is it empowering you? Or is it just feeding your fears? The devil is a master of propaganda, using it to mess with our thoughts and beliefs.
That's pretty sneaky. So it's not that these things are bad in themselves, right? Like fear or certain kinds of information. It's that the devil uses them to distract us and keep us from reaching our full potential.
Exactly. He wants to keep us so busy worrying and doubting ourselves that we never actually take action. He knows that if our minds aren't busy working towards something good, that's when he can really get to us.
So it sounds like we need a serious game plan to outsmart this devil guy.
Well, luckily, Hill gives us exactly that. He lays out 7 principles to help us break free from the devil's influence and achieve real success.
All right, now you're talking. Let's get into those principles. And knowing you, I bet you've already picked out a few that our listeners are going to love.
You know me too well. The first one that jumps out is definiteness of purpose. Remember how the devil thrives on us just drifting around without direction? Well, Hill says that having clear goals is like kryptonite to the devil. It gives you a direction to move in.
Yeah.
And helps you resist those tempting distractions.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And think about your own life, Do you ever feel like you're not sure what you really want? Having a crystal clear purpose can really help you get focused and take charge.
Absolutely. And it's not just about setting any old goal. It's about finding a purpose that really speaks to your heart, something that aligns with your values and passions. That's where the real power lies.
Okay, so definiteness of purpose is a big one. What else does Hill give us to fight back against the devil?
He also talks about the importance of learning from adversity. And this one might surprise you because, let's face it, nobody likes to fail.
Yeah, failure usually feels pretty awful, but you're saying Hill actually sees it as a good thing.
He does. He even calls it a blessing in disguise. Now, he's not saying we should go out and try to fail, but he is saying that failure can be an incredibly powerful teacher. It forces us to reevaluate our approach, to figure out our weaknesses, and ultimately to become more resilient.
So it's not about avoiding failure, it's about learning how to use those inevitable setbacks to our advantage, to turn those failures into fuel for future success.
Exactly. And I'm willing to bet you've had times in your own life where a setback actually led to something even better, like maybe a career change that seemed scary at first, but ended up opening doors you never even knew existed.
You know what? That's a great point. It's so easy to get caught up in the negative emotions of failure, but Hill is pushing us to look for those hidden opportunities, the silver linings in those dark clouds.
And that brings us to the third principle that I think is going to resonate with a lot of people: self-discipline.
Okay, self-discipline.
Yeah.
That sounds kind of like a buzzkill, doesn't it? Like giving up all the fun things in life.
Not necessarily. Hill's not saying we have to become robots or anything. It's more about learning to control our impulses, to resist those temptations that derail us from our goals.
So it's less about deprivation and more about making choices that align with our values and goals. It's about being the CEO of your own mind, right?
Exactly. And think about the things you've already identified that you want to improve. Maybe it's procrastination or overspending or some unhealthy habits. Self-discipline is the key to breaking free from those patterns.
All right, so we've got three powerful principles from Hill: definiteness of purpose, learning from adversity, and self-discipline. It's like he's giving us a step-by-step guide to taking control of our lives and kicking the devil to the curb.
And he doesn't stop there. But before we get to the rest of the principles, let's talk about something else Hill tackles head on: the way we learn. He has some pretty strong opinions about education and religion, and it might make you rethink your own experiences.
Ooh, this is where things get interesting. You know I love a good controversy. Tell me more.
Well, Hill was a big critic of both institutions. He argued that they often fail to teach us the most important skill of all: how to think for ourselves. He believed they focused too much on rote memorization and blind obedience, and not enough on developing critical thinking skills.
And this is where things get really wild. He actually channels the devil's perspective on education.
I know, right? And surprisingly, the devil makes a pretty good point. He argues that education should be about teaching kids how to solve problems, how to think creatively, and how to make informed decisions, not just regurgitate facts for a test.
So the devil is basically saying we need to evolve beyond just stuffing our brains with information and start focusing on developing those mental tools we need to really thrive in the real world.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder, how has your own education shaped your ability to think critically and independently? Are there any mental barriers or limiting beliefs you need to break free from?
You know what? I'm starting to think this devil character might have a point. But before we go full-blown devil's advocate here, let's take a break and come back to unpack the rest of Hill's principles.
Sounds like a plan. And trust me, the next part of Hill's playbook for outwitting the devil is just as mind-blowing.
So we were just talking about how the devil just loves to keep us stuck in those ruts. But Hill actually says that failure, even though it can really hurt, can help us break free. He even calls it a blessing in disguise, which sounds kind of crazy.
I know, right? Who wants a blessing that feels like a punch in the gut? But think about it. Have you ever had a setback, like a project that totally flopped or a goal you didn't reach?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Did it make you rethink things?
Hmm.
Maybe even discover a new path you wouldn't have considered otherwise?
Totally. I remember this one time I completely bombed an important presentation. It was mortifying, but it made me rethink my whole approach. I ended up changing my presentation style completely, and you know what? My next presentation was a huge hit.
Exactly. It's like they say, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. But Hill goes even further. He says that failure only really becomes permanent when we let it define us. When we give up on our dreams because of one setback.
So it's not about never failing, it's about having that grit, that resilience to keep going even when things get tough.
Right. And remember how Hill talked about his other self, that source of inner strength? Well, he believed that failure could actually help us access that deeper wisdom. It forces us to think outside the box, to get creative, and to tap into resources we didn't even know we had.
Okay, I'm starting to see how failure, when you look at it the right way, can actually help us grow, but how do we make sure we're actually learning from our mistakes and not just making the same ones over and over?
That's where understanding our subconscious minds comes in. Hill was really fascinated by the power of the subconscious and how it affects our thoughts, beliefs, and actions.
He's not talking about something mystical, right? He's talking about how the human brain actually works.
Exactly. He describes the subconscious as a kind of mental filing cabinet where all our experiences, beliefs, and emotions are stored. And he makes this really interesting point. He says that the thoughts we mix with the strongest emotions, whether positive or negative, tend to be the ones that really stick with us.
So if we're constantly dwelling on negative thoughts and fears, those are the files that are going to be front and center in our mental filing cabinet.
Precisely. They become self-fulfilling prophecies. But here's the good news. We have the power to reprogram our subconscious minds. It's about becoming aware of those negative thought patterns and consciously choosing to focus on more empowering beliefs.
Okay, so it's not about ignoring our negative thoughts, it's about acknowledging them and then choosing to shift our focus to something more positive and productive.
Right. And this connects back to Hill's principle of self-discipline. It's about training your mind to focus on what you want, not what you're afraid of.
This makes me think about my own struggles with procrastination. Sometimes I get so caught up in being afraid of not doing a perfect job that I end up not doing anything at all.
Ah, the perfectionism trap. The devil loves that one.
Mm.
He knows that fear of criticism can paralyze us. But think about Hill's principle of learning from adversity. What if you approached your work with the idea that it's okay to make mistakes? That's all part of the learning process.
That's a good point. It's about shifting my perspective from being afraid of failure to being curious and willing to experiment.
And remember, you're not alone in this thing. Hill emphasizes that relationships are really important for our success and well-being. He even asks the devil for advice on how to handle difficult relationships.
Wait a minute, the devil giving relationship advice. I gotta hear this.
Okay, and you know what? His advice is actually pretty solid. He says that the key to good relationships is mutual benefit, finding solutions where everyone wins. It's not about one person always getting their way. It's about finding compromises that respect everyone's needs.
That makes sense. But relationships can be tough, right? We can't always control how other people act.
Absolutely. But Hill reminds us that we can control our own reactions. It's about becoming more self-aware, understanding our own triggers, and learning to communicate our needs effectively.
Okay, so we've got all these tools for taking control of our minds, managing our fears, and building strong relationships. But what about those things outside of us that influence our success?
That's where Hill's principle of environment comes in. He says that our surroundings have a big impact on our thoughts and behaviors. Think about the people you spend the most time with. Do they inspire you and support your growth? Or do they drain your energy and make you fall back into those negative patterns?
It's like that saying, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with.
Exactly. And it's not just about people. It's also about the information you consume, the places you go, everything that contributes to your overall environment. Hill suggests that we have a choice in the environments we expose ourselves to, and choosing wisely can make a huge difference.
So it's about creating a space that nourishes your mind, body, and spirit, a space that supports your goals and values.
Precisely. And this brings us to another important principle, time. Hill sees time as this powerful force that can either work for us or against us, depending on how we manage it.
This makes me think about how easily I get distracted and how much time I waste on things that don't really matter.
We all do it.
Mm-hmm.
But Hill reminds us that time is limited, and we need to be intentional about how we use it. It's about prioritizing our goals, setting boundaries, and learning to say no to things that drain our time and energy.
So it's not just about working hard, it's about working smart, focusing on the things that will actually get us closer to our goals. And that takes discipline, which brings us back to one of Hill's main principles.
Right, it's all connected. And speaking of connection, Hill also talks about the importance of harmony. He believed that success wasn't just about money, but about living a balanced and fulfilling life.
So it's about aligning our actions with our values, finding that sweet spot where we feel a sense of peace and purpose.
Exactly. It's about cultivating harmony within ourselves and in our relationships with others. And that leads us to the final principle in Hill's playbook, caution.
Caution. That seems a little unexpected, especially when we're talking about achieving big goals.
I know, right? You'd think it would be all about taking risks and just going for it. But Hill isn't saying we should be reckless. He's saying that we need to be discerning, to think things through carefully and avoid taking unnecessary risks.
So it's about finding that balance between being bold and being wise, taking calculated risks, but also protecting ourselves from potential harm.
Exactly. And, even the devil had some wise words to say about caution. He warned against making impulsive decisions and told us to really think things through and consider the potential consequences.
Okay, now I'm really starting to see the devil in a whole new light. He's not just this evil tempter. He's also a source of wisdom, even if it's a little twisted.
Hill was really good at finding wisdom in unexpected places. And remember, his whole idea was to interview the devil to figure out why people fail.
So by understanding the devil's tactics, we can learn how to outsmart him and achieve greater success.
Exactly. And Hill's 7 principles, definiteness of purpose, learning from adversity, self-discipline, environment, time, harmony, and caution, give us the ultimate playbook for doing just that.
Wow, we've covered a lot of ground here, from the power of failure to the importance of our environment, and even the devil's relationship advice.
But remember, this is just a taste of what Hill's work has to offer. There's so much more to explore, and each principle has a lot of depth that we could get into.
Right. But before we get too deep into the details, I think it's important to talk about something we haven't mentioned yet. Some people have criticized Hill's work, haven't they? Some say that his focus on individual achievement can be a little too, well, individualistic.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Hill's work was written in a different time, and it's important to remember that his perspective might not completely address the systemic factors that contribute to inequality and disadvantage.
It's like, sure, we all have the power to shape our own lives, but what about people who face huge obstacles because of their circumstances? Does Hill's philosophy really take that into account?
That's a really important question, and it's one we can't ignore. While Hill's work emphasizes personal responsibility, it's crucial to recognize that we don't all start from the same place.
Right. It's about finding that balance between taking ownership of our own lives and acknowledging the role that systemic factors play.
Exactly. And I think it's also important to point out that Hill's focus on positive thinking can sometimes seem a little, well, simplistic.
Yeah, like just think happy thoughts and all your problems will go away. But life's not always that easy, is it?
Definitely not.
Right.
And it's important to understand that negative emotions are a natural part of life. It's not about suppressing them. It's about learning how to deal with them in a healthy way.
So while Hill's work offers a lot of valuable insights, it's important to look at it critically and to recognize its limitations.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But even with those limitations, Hill's work gives us a powerful framework for taking control of our lives and achieving our goals. And there's one more aspect we haven't talked about yet that really speaks to the power of the human spirit, Hill's concept of the other self.
Oh, yeah, we touched on that earlier. It's that idea that we all have this hidden source of wisdom and power inside of us, right?
Exactly.
Mm.
And Hill believed that accessing this other self was the key to achieving true success. He talked about things like meditation, visualization, and spending time in nature as ways to connect with this deeper part of ourselves.
So it's about creating space for quiet reflection and allowing our intuition to guide us.
Right. And Hill also believed that going through tough times could actually help us connect with our other self. He said that when we're pushed to our limits, we often find strengths and resources we didn't even know we had.
It's like those moments when you think you can't handle anymore and then suddenly you find this inner strength you never knew was there.
Exactly. And Hill believed that in those moments, our other self often steps in to offer guidance, inspiration, and the power to overcome obstacles that seemed impossible.
Okay, so we've explored Hill's philosophy, gone through his 7 principles, and even talked about some of the criticisms of his work. But I feel like there's still so much to talk about, especially about this other self and how it relates to the idea of outsmarting the devil.
You're right. It's a complex topic with a lot of layers, but I think we've got a good foundation, and we can continue to explore these ideas in our next session.
That sounds good to me. But before we wrap up, I want to ask our listeners a question. What if connecting with your other self is the real key to outsmarting the devil? What if by tapping into that deeper wisdom within, we can overcome our fears, break free from those limiting beliefs, and achieve a level of success we never thought possible? Something to think about until our next deep dive.
Definitely. It's a fascinating idea, and I'm looking forward to exploring it further.
So as we're wrapping up this deep dive into outwitting the devil, I keep thinking about that hypnotic rhythm thing Hill talks about. It's like we all just fall into these patterns,
Yeah.
in our behavior and our thoughts, like we're on autopilot.
Yeah. It's a pretty powerful idea. And it really shows how important self-awareness is. If we're not paying attention, it's so easy to get caught up in those unconscious patterns, whether they're good or bad.
Right. And think about those times when you catch yourself reacting in a way that, isn't helpful, like maybe getting defensive in an argument or putting off something you need to do. It's like those hypnotic rhythms are controlling us without us even realizing it.
Hill thought that a lot of those rhythms come from our past, especially from our childhood. Like the messages we got about success and failure, money relationships, all that stuff shapes our beliefs and patterns deep down.
It's like those early experiences kind of write the script for how we deal with the world. And if we're not careful, we can end up just repeating those patterns over and over, even if they're not good for us anymore.
And Hill would say, it's not about blaming our past or our parents. It's about recognizing how much power those experiences have on us now, and making a choice to change the script.
Okay, so it's not about pretending the past didn't happen. It's about recognizing those patterns and consciously deciding to create new ones that fit with who we want to be.
Exactly. And that's where Hill's idea of personal responsibility comes in. He's basically saying, you may not have chosen your past, but you can choose your future.
That's both empowering and kind of scary, isn't it? It's like he's saying we have this amazing power to create our own lives, but we also have to use that power wisely.
Right. And it means we have to be honest with ourselves. We have to see those patterns that are holding us back and really make an effort to change them.
And that's where Hill's 7 principles can help. They're like a toolbox for breaking out of those hypnotic rhythms and building new patterns that help us grow and succeed.
Like definiteness of purpose, for example.
Hmm.
If you're just drifting through life, you're more likely to get sucked into those negative patterns.
Mm.
But if you have a clear idea of what you want to achieve, it's easier to resist those temptations and stay focused.
It's like having a map to guide you through life and help you stay on course, even when those hypnotic rhythms try to pull you off track.
And then there's learning from adversity. When we accept that setbacks are going to happen and we see them as chances to learn, we break free from that fear of failure and those negative patterns that keep us playing it safe.
It's about changing our thinking from why me to what can I learn from this?
Exactly. And remember Hill's idea that we all have another self, that source of wisdom and strength inside us. Well, he thought that tough times could actually help us connect with that deeper part of ourselves.
It's like those times when you're pushed to your absolute limit and you find this resilience you never knew you had,
Mm.
almost like your other self comes out to help you get through it.
Right. And Hill also talked about the importance of environment. If you're surrounded by negativity, if you're always taking in information that makes you afraid, it's going to be really hard to break out of those hypnotic rhythms.
It's like trying to grow a beautiful garden in bad soil.
Yeah.
You have to create an environment that supports your mind, body, and spirit.
And it's not just your physical surroundings. It's the people you hang out with, the things you read, everything that influences you. Hill would say that we have a responsibility to create a good environment for ourselves, to surround ourselves with things that help us grow and feel good.
That makes me think about social media. Sometimes I get so caught up in all the negativity and drama that it just drains me and makes me feel down.
Sounds like the devil's work to me. He knows that our environment can either lift us up or drag us down, but we have the power to choose.
So it's about being aware of what we're letting into our minds and making sure it's stuff that supports our values and goals.
Exactly. And that also ties into Hill's principle of time. If you're constantly distracted, if you're not careful about how you spend your time, it's going to be tough to focus on the things that really matter.
It's that feeling of always being busy but never getting anything important done.
Hill would say we need to be in control of our time, not the other way around. It's about setting boundaries, making our goals a priority, and saying no to things that waste our energy and distract us from what we're trying to do.
And that takes discipline, which brings us back to another one of Hill's big principles.
It's all connected, you see.
Yeah.
And in the end, it's about finding balance in our lives.
Yeah.
Our work, our relationships, our health, our spiritual growth. Hill called this harmony.
It's about making our actions match our values and building a life that feels right and fulfilling.
Exactly. And it's not about reaching some perfect state of balance. It's about finding that sweet spot where you feel at peace and like your life has meaning.
And of course, we can't forget Hill's principle of caution. It might sound weird, especially when we're talking about achieving big things, but it's about being smart, making good decisions, and not taking unnecessary risks.
Even the devil, in his own way, talked about how important caution is. He said not to make decisions without thinking and to really consider what might happen.
It's like that saying, look before you leap. Sometimes it's better to slow down, think things through, and make sure we're not jumping into something we'll regret.
Hill thought that real success needs both courage and wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
We need to be brave enough to go after our dreams, but we also need to be smart about it.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Outwitting the Devil, I think we've learned a lot about success and failure and how powerful our minds are.
Hill's work really shows us that we have the power to create our own lives, to overcome challenges, and to find a level of fulfillment we might not have thought possible.
And even though his ideas might not have all the answers, they give us a really good way to think about taking control of our lives, facing our inner demons, and building a life that's both successful and meaningful.
And remember, Hill believed that everyone has an other self, that source of wisdom and strength that's always there for us. So as you keep going on your journey, take some time to connect with that deeper part of yourself. Listen to your gut feeling Embrace those challenges as chances to grow and never stop believing in your ability to create a truly amazing life.
That's a great thought to end on. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.